But we're on the interwebs.
Oh, my bad.
Okay, well,
You can't lie on the interwebs.
Everything is true.
Everything you read on the internet is true.
Interweb.
That's a quote from Abe Lincoln.
Speaking of everything being true on the internet, I had a Reddit post pop up in my Reddit timeline that basically was a poll saying, if you have an NPC pop out and say, there's a caravan down there in trouble, you guys should check it out, is that railroading? And the issue for me was when you actually open the poll up, you had 159 people saying no. And then you had 54 people saying yes, but not as much as you might not want. And then 3 people outright saying yes.
That it was railroading.
So setting this up, we're talking a little bit about railroading in games here. But it seems to be something that people don't have a great definition of. So what is railroading to you in a game, Steve?
Wow. Put me on the spot.
Yeah.
So from a dungeon master or game master standpoint, to me, railroading is there is only one way for you to get from point A to point B. From I got a quest to we beat the big bad guy. There's only one way. You've got to get this piece of information from that shopkeeper. That from that you go to this lonely woods and you must find the key under the log in that wood, and then you can go open the door of the castle and you fight the guy. And that's the only way. And therefore, for me as a dungeon master to make the game work, I've got to continually herd you towards the shopkeeper. And then I've got to continually herd you towards the forest, and then the log, and then to the castle. To me, that's railroading. There's only one path to success.
Okay.
Yeah.
You agree with that?
I agree with that. I also think that railroading can also be when I blatantly refuse to allow you to express your character the way that you would like. So if you have a character that, you know, I can't even think of a good, like Aniko Montoya, she had a big bad guy in her backstory, and one of her driving factors as a character was to confront this guy. And if at every turn that I was like, I want to see, does this guy match this description, you were always shutting me down and never letting me explore that part of my character, to me, that's also railroading. It's also saying, I'm not going to let you play your character or make decisions based on what your character wants to do. Instead, you're going to do the only thing I want to do.
So an unwillingness to bring in the characterization, the character backstories into the scenario, adventure, or whatever. Yeah.
So I
don't think it requires bringing the character backstory in, but if I am a DM or GM and don't allow you to chase after your bad guy.
Right. You're railroading me into being out of certain things.
I think there's a huge difference between what you said, having set rungs on a ladder, basically, and what
now you're mixing metaphors. Are we laddering or railroading? Just messing with you. Go ahead.
And what this person was talking about, which was their people weren't going the way they necessarily wanted them to, and they knew there was an encounter over here, so they had somebody come up and say, hey, this is happening. Do you want to go check it out? Like, there's a difference in between do you want to go check it out and you've got to go check it out now.
I think when you boil down railroading, it is an inability of I'm going to just use DM because I'm not going to do the DM GM keeper thing. I'm just going to call it a DM the rest of the time because I just can't.
Just phone it in again.
Yep, I'm the slacker.
Put the effort.
I think it's a lack of a DM's or a choice of the DM to not broaden their story to be fun for their players. It's
player agency. Are you giving the players the ability to do what they want in the world? Now, that is a social contract between the GM and the players, that I'll give you the agency to go and do what you want. You've got to agree that you understand that this is an adventure, which some parts of it have been written and planned for. And so take the hooks.
Right.
Go at them your own way, but take the hooks. But, like, hey, here's this whole thing. And then the party says, no, you know what we're going to do? We're going to just travel over to this other town and see what's over there.
Yeah. I think what they were talking about to me is more of a hook. But if your game cannot continue without them taking that hook, that becomes railroading. But putting it in front of them with a very point blank, like, hey, shiny object quest over here, that's not a railroad to me. To me, that is a plot hook. And as a player, you should have the foresight to be like, maybe I help the DM out. Maybe I take the plot hook. But
maybe you don't.
Maybe you don't. I just, to me, railroading has always boiled down to a lack of imagination and flexibility on a DM's part. To me, that's what it's boiled down to.
I feel attacked.
Well, but you don't railroad.
Don't I?
No.
I think it's very possible to railroad without it feeling
railroad
like a violation.
Yeah.
Right? For instance, if I need you to get this clue that there's a key hidden under a log somewhere, it doesn't have to be the jeweler.
No.
And if the party decides they want to go to the tavern or they want to go check out the farm outside, I could take that clue and put it anywhere.
But to me, that's
kind of railroading, right? So you think you got the ability to go anywhere, but then I plant the stuff because eventually I got to get you to the big bad, right?
But to me, that's what makes it not railroading, because you are adapting your story to the needs of your players. You're still being adaptive and creative and allowing your players agency while still guiding them on the story. That's fine. But if you were to say, well, literally the story will not progress any further till they go to that jeweler, and just let them walk around town, because we've all been there where it's like, well, I can't find anything else to do. Like, what the fuck am I supposed to do? When you decide, okay, if they're not going to go to the jeweler, I'll just move that clue somewhere else. That's not railroading. To me, that is the exact opposite. That is you exercising creativity and adaptability to your players. It's the exact opposite. You can still drive the story while creatively adjusting to your players' wants and needs in the game.
So I'm guessing your stance on railroading is bad.
When it's true railroading. When it is all, the entire story stops until your players conform to the exact story that you have laid out, yes. But I have never seen either one of you play a game that way.
Or we're really good at hiding it.
Emily hates Critical Role.
Yeah. But they have a social construct within their group that they're okay with that. To them, that's not railroading. He has adapted his story to their needs, which is they want to pursue his story as written. That's
and that's kind of my point too. That railroading, we think of it railroading bad, and, like barbarian speak, railroading bad, but in reality, railroading is sometimes very necessary, especially if you're talking about like a one shot that you need to get done in one shot.
I think it's always the DM's, a little foreshadowing, it's always the DM's job to help guide the story, right? Mm-hmm. They're telling a story with the players and they have to help guide it. And I guess the extent to how heavy-handed the DM gets with that really is where it's going to draw the railroading complaints.
Yeah.
So if you can do it a little looser, but a lot of it's got to do with how people play D&D and how it has kind of evolved over the years. Back in the early 80s, could you buy the Castle of the Vampire Queen and go play that one right after you went in town and bought some neck armor? You could. And that has a big bad at the end and dungeon in the middle, and you had to get to it, right?
Right.
So that requires some. But there were times when me and my group of friends, we didn't have the money to shell out for these pre-made modules or whatever. And it was very sandboxy. Like, well, what do y'all want to do? Well, we're going to go do this. And then the DM on the fly was generating random encounters, just coming up with what happens when you're out there. But there was no overarching storyline, no Princess Peach to go save or whatever. It was just go do this and these things happen. And then over time, the concept of this overarching story and campaigns kind of evolved, right? And when you have that, then there is some goal to be had. Save the queen, stop the evil guy from taking over the universe, whatever it is. Once you have that overarching story with a semi-defined end, then the guidance from the DM has to come in.
Yeah.
A little bit at least.
But once you start buying books like Curse of Strahd, Ghosts of Saltmarsh, name them off, right? Rime of the Frost Maiden.
Descent into Avernus.
Right, the need for more structured guidance happens. How do I get them to this spot where they finally meet Lady Upturell or whatever her name was?
Yeah, I think for me, basically it boils down to railroading is a violation of the agreement between the DM and the players. If I'm sitting down at a table with you and you're running Descent into Avernus, and I'm like, yes, I want to play that, then I expect you to some degree to guide me along that story. That is your job. But if I sit down and then you just decide, well, no, we're going to do this thing, and at every turn I'm like, well, I don't want to do that thing, and I keep trying to get away from it, and you keep pushing me back, that is where you have violated the agreement with me and changed the rules at the table. So to me, railroading is not so much about how you tell the story. It is about forcing your players into situations that they have not, as a group, decided that's the way they want to go, including the DM. The DM is part of that. And if that's a really disparity between you and your group, that's not a good group for you. Like, it's just not. To me, railroading isn't so much about how you tell the story. It's about why you're making those choices in the story. If you're doing it to force your players to do what they don't want to do, that's railroading. If you're doing it to guide them while still letting them have fun, that's storytelling. Does that make sense?
Somewhat.
I think railroading is less about moving the, you got to get the key under the lock.
It makes sense to me. So I was just...
I think you're still dealing in absolutes over there, Emperor.
Yeah. But I feel like if as a DM, you refuse to acknowledge the needs of your players at your table.
You know what I think it is sometimes? And this kind of would go to your thing about, allowing you to explore your backstory or allowing you to play your character the way you want to play. I think some DMs just want the story to play out the way they imagine it playing out.
Yeah.
And then some DMs just want the characters in the game to be the way they imagine the characters.
That's
and
true.
So they're taking too much control over the story.
That's definitely, like, I can see a little railroading being a good thing on a lot of things, but when the GM is basically playing the game by themselves and you guys are just doing the voices for them every now and then, it's vastly different.
Puff said he thinks the difference for him is knowing whether or not the DM is trying to railroad. The Reddit example is annoying to me because it seems like a really obvious attempt for the DM to lead the party in a certain direction without the party seeking it out. I don't mind being guided if it happens organically, which may or may not be railroading, I guess. Now, you're right. Like, if your DM's like, no, the caravan's going to chase you down until you deal with it, like, that's very aggressively railroading.
Or if your mother was on the caravan and you find out later and it's like a backwards way of saying, well, next time you better listen when I try to make you do something. I
just feel like there's
I did that one time. You never let it go.
I just feel like there's so many options for DMs that, like, railroading really doesn't have to be a thing. Like, if I want you to go to that caravan and I know your mom's in it, but you don't, then when you're like, no, we're going to go, okay, well, you hear a screech in the distance, and as you turn your head, you see your mother's head kind of pulling out of a... Like, there's ways to engage that in a story that drives it without it being...
That is still railroading. That's, I think, even more railroading than saying there's a caravan off in the distance that I think needs some help. Because once you get the mother angle on it, of course they're going there. Unless they're complete miscreants or something.
It could be. I still don't think... I don't know.
I don't think railroading is a completely terrible thing. I think it's something you need to work out with your table in the very beginning. Like, how do you feel about railroading? Do you want to play in a sandbox? And people that want to play in a sandbox, then you set up a sandbox for them. But if they're like, I want to play Curse of Strahd, or I want to play Mr. Corbett, and I don't want to sit there spinning wheels in the sandbox. So whenever we get stuck, Go ahead, give us something.
Because we tell that to you. Like when if we're really stuck, we would much rather you lead us down a road. So because we want to play through the storyline as it's written, we want to experience it that way, but that's us. Not everybody wants that.
I think maybe some of it has to do with DM experience.
Yeah,
Probably
definitely.
a lot of it.
If a DM gets a module and it lays it out, here it is, then as players, for a new DM, you kind of got to let them.
Yeah, definitely.
Let them do that. So same effect as railroading, but not really railroading in that.
Yeah.
But, Puffs, she makes a good point when she said, it seems like a really obvious attempt for the DM to lead the party, right?
Yeah.
I guess it's the difference between a hook and a shove,
Right.
Yeah.
right? Plan a hook, if they take it, go for it, right?
Yeah.
And as you get experience, to bring this back around to my original point as a DM, you realize whatever was good, what I needed to happen down there,
Can happen
I can
somewhere
just pluck that piece of it out and put it wherever I need to for the game, so the players still have their agency. But it takes some. When we first started Call of Cthulhu, man, I was in those.
That's not what happens. Go back.
Those scenarios, and it got really crazy for me when, the third scenario we did was written very sandboxy. There was no, this clue leads you to this clue, and then that one leads you to that clue. It was like you could find a bunch of clues when pieced together that gave you something, and that was really hard to prepare for and intimidating as a DM.
But you did it beautifully. And we've talked about this previously about how everybody should DM once, because then you get a real appreciation for how to take plot hooks, because you're like, oh, well, let me help this DM out. I want to go. I want to do that.
Well, that's about all the time we have for this segment.
Yeah.
I think we've covered all our bases pretty well.
Pounded it into the ground.
Bam, bam, bam.
Drove it straight into its own
We
grave.
really didn't want to even do that topic, but John made it. It was a railroad.
He forced us.